Joining us right now is Yves Rebetez from Mindpath Financial Conferences. Yves, thank you very much for joining me.
Pierre, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
The advent of ETFs has brought with it many benefits for the advisor, for the industry, for investors, but it's also brought with it some substantial challenges as well. Number one, because it's disruptive to the way things have been done traditionally, at least in Canada. And it's forcing advisors to reconstruct their practice, to have to transition potentially from having been transactionally oriented to being fee-based. What do you see as the biggest challenge to this transition?
Yeah, so that's a key question as to how, looking at 2020 and beyond, how does that relationship between the advisor and the client unfold? And what has been really the challenge that ETFs have sort of brought to the fore in terms of, for advisors, the value of the function that they perform for their client. And so I think whenever you talk about ETFs, the number one thing that comes to the fore is, obviously in terms of costs, it's a sort of race to the bottom. In terms of the power behind this, it's about the idea that most active solutions don't have any long-term success in terms of outperforming the passive solution. It's kind of counterintuitive to some of the value that advisors have traditionally been bringing to clients, namely the idea that I can pick equities or I can pick funds and give you the right solutions. And by the time you get to a scenario where all of a sudden there's these instruments that have quasi-zero cost of ownership, and where one of the important elements of the discussion revolves around essentially being long-term strategic in nature and remaining committed to the markets, it becomes challenging for an advisor. Like, how do I work with that kind of value proposition? And it goes back to the issue of fees. And so I think the discussion is advisors can be intimidated by ETFs. We think that they need to feel more empowered. And ultimately, I think the one thing that they really need to remind themselves of is that clients, at the end of the day, if they wanted to be an advisor, they'd be an advisor. There's a reason why clients have advisors. There's a reason why we still have human interaction, and I just don't talk to an app all the time. And if you ever want me to freak out at my phone, it's usually when I talk to Siri. But jokes aside, I think the importance of the space is this. ETFs are building blocks. They are a tremendous access vehicle. And in the course of the conference here, we've been focusing on actively managed ETF solutions. And we have a lot of mutual fund players that have developed thoughtful product lineups. And they have significant bench strength in terms of assisting advisors in understanding the products, helping advisors really look at where their clients are at, what the clients' goals are, having a better appreciation for the risk side of the equation and the risk tolerance side of the equation, and then ultimately being better able to construct portfolio with what are tools, namely ETFs, that are actually not going away. The fact that the cost of ownership of these tools is going down is actually great for an advisor. The main issue is you need to be able to understand what each one of these tools can potentially do for you and your clients, which one are relevant in terms of the objectives your client is aiming to accomplish, and then, are you using some of these tools for tactical purposes, thematic access? Are these short-term kind of decisions you're making around the core? Is your client more looking at, I want to be more active? Well, there used to be this discussion of it's either all active or it's either all passive. That's not the answer anymore.
Or it's either all fee-based or it's all transactional.
And
right?
Those don't have to be the all or nothing kind of answer. The real issue in my books is it's in the relationship between the advisor and the client. That relationship is absolutely critical so that you can, over time, bring to the client solutions that are going to help that client on the path to attaining their objectives and staying the course and not getting lost whilst they're getting onto that journey, and also not getting trapped by picking the wrong solutions and picking things which economically make no sense. That's the role of an advisor. I want to be able to bounce things off my advisor, and I want to know that that advisor has access to good products, good support within their own organization, and also good relationship outside of their own organization with providers and manufacturers that have bench strength to help support that advisor in understanding what's happening in the space, so that you don't get lost, right? I mean, by the time you have 800 some odd ETFs, do you and I need 800 ETFs? I don't have 800 ETFs in my account. Should I have a few more that I have? Should I have a few less? Possibly, right? But you need to have you need to have good discussions with your advisors about these things. And the advisors, there's so much coming at them. They really need to be empowered, and that's, I think, the benefit that we can bring to the table in those kind of events.
I think, for example, like just a few years ago, advisors went through the eye of the needle with CRM2. That was a big adjustment. You know, suddenly, I mean, if they had talked about it all along with their clients, no problem. But if it wasn't clear, or if it wasn't, transparent before, it is now. And so that was a major hurdle for some and easy for others, but it was a challenge across the industry. It was a challenge for the financial institutions to also impose, to implement. And then at the same time, concurrently, is you've had this explosion of interest in the ETF business. So not only are you now causing the legislation or rule, regulation, causing pressure on compensation, but then you have an organic element coming into the marketplace, such as ETFs, which are causing more compression. So much focus on cost, when in fact the value proposition of an advisor is not an accounting problem. It's an advice issue. It's a value issue. What value are you actually giving to clients for what you've done? And in most cases, advisors have done their clients a big service. Investors who have advisors have done substantially better than investors who don't have advisors. That's been shown in numerous studies by a country mile, by 200, 300% better in terms of the overall results. Advisors definitely feel threatened by the advent of. So I agree with what you're saying. Advisors feel threatened by it. Maybe that's some of the reluctance that some advisors feel about coming and embracing this change, adapting, or allowing for themselves to adapt. But it's hard when you see the compensation model you've been used to for the life of your work being destroyed by a new paradigm, and you see transaction costs for stocks, ETFs, funds falling to zero in some cases. What's left? Well, advice, and then there's the concern about how do I go to my clients now and say, okay, this is how we used to do things. I used to recommend investments, and the investments would pay me. You didn't pay me anything, or it was DSC, or if it was, right? Unless they were already a fee-based advisor and they were doing F-class funds, of course. But we're going to go from that, and now instead of paying for the investments, which is what we always did, now you're going to pay for me. Right. In a nutshell. The conversation might not go exactly that way, but the point is that can be something that causes a certain amount of concern.
Yeah, it can be a bit
anxiety.
Intimidating, right?
Sure. Anxiety.
It's never the greatest thing to stand in front of somebody and saying, "Oh, I'm having to give you a bill of this much," right?
Yeah.
Because right at that time you could be asked, "Well, what exactly did you do for me for that to justify giving me that invoice?" But I think you sort of hit it on the nail on the head.
Yes.
The issue is really not the issue of just simply comparing the cost of mutual funds and or actively managed solution with a zero cost pure passive index access.
And that's confounding too, because not to the advisor, but
that isn't the issue. Of course, you're going to not. Of course, it's going to be extremely difficult to look at that and say, "Well, I'm adding value in that particular discussion." This isn't the question. Those are the building blocks, and if you just focus on this, then of course, over the course of 30 years of overpaying versus market accessing purely market exposure, of course, the math say you don't do better. The issue is, to your point, going back to the issue of value, is that price is never really an issue if there is value, right? So
exactly.
The value in the relationship is this ability to help the investor stay the course, help the investor understand the vagaries of market, help the investors construct portfolio that reflect their ability to tolerate risk and or respectively where they are in their life cycle of investing. And that has a lot of value over time. I mean, I'm sure you know that the value that one of the largest money manager, and for that matter ETF provider in the world, namely Vanguard, has ascribed to that advisory capacity is somewhere around, 300 basis points?
Advisor alpha.
Yeah, advisor alpha. And I think it's very valid, that particular discussion, for advisors to look at that and realize that you don't have to be afraid of saying, I do get to be compensated. If that doesn't work, ask your client how well they're doing at their job. If they work for nothing over the long haul, that doesn't work. That doesn't give you good solution, good insights, good feedback, access to good solutions. Now, going back to the ETF space, just because people can trade for nothing, just because the MERs on some of the solutions may be nothing, just because you will hear that the world of fees is flat and the flat is basically zero and you can get access to asset allocation for zero, well, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden a client who is not well versed in the world of finance can go, I'm going to do all of this on my own. You let them try, and after a while, you'll find out that a lot of these clients are going to come back because that's not their job. That's not their forte. They've got lots of other things in their lives that justify having an interaction with someone who is a qualified investment advisor that can provide them the kind of feedback and the kind of, they can act as the sounding board that's going to help solidify in the investor's mind that they are in a good place, that they are on track for the objectives they're trying to attain, that they shouldn't overthink sometimes specific aspects of, should I hold this and should I try to trade this and market time and all of these sort of things, which even professionals don't have the greatest track record of successfully doing over time, right? So it's about going back to the basics of that relationship and how important it is to have an individual who you can trust through time, who understands your personal financial circumstances and your goal and is able to give you that opinion, that third-party opinion from someone who understands the landscape, who understands the product shelf, who has the relationships with a variety of intermediaries and can look to your best interest and tell you, you can take this into account, this you can afford to leave on the side for this and that and the other reason, right? And if you disagree, well, you can, like in any other field of endeavor, you can go and look for another opinion, right? But once you have an advisor that's demonstrated over and over that they are working with you and for you, then to me, that value of advice is there, right? And at that point, you no longer have an issue.
Well, it reminds me of the old saying, 80% of success is showing up. And showing up means being available, being accessible, and being understanding, being knowledgeable of your client's needs.
Absolutely. And that's not changing tomorrow.
Yep.
That's going to remain the case for quite some time, for sure.
Yves, thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre.
Pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.